At 69, I believed I had already survived the worst life could throw at me. I had buried my wife, retired quietly, and trusted that the family I helped raise would protect me in my final years. My son's wife, the woman I welcomed into my home like a daughter, used to bring me coffee every morning. She'd smile, ask about my health, remind me to take my medicine. I thought it was kindness. I was wrong. The fog started slowly. Names slipped, dates tangled. I would wake up tired even after long sleep. She said it was old age. I believed her. When I asked why my signature appeared on papers I didn't remember signing, she laughed softly and said, "Abba G, you forget things now." My son avoided my eyes. The house that once felt warm began to feel staged, like everyone knew their lines except me. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. She was angry, whispering sharply about accounts, power of attorney, and just a little more time. Something inside me snapped awake. That night, instead of drinking the coffee she brought, I poured it into a plant. By morning, the leaves had curled and turned yellow. Fear is a strange fuel. It clears the mind. I pretended nothing had changed. I drank water instead of coffee. I acted confused when she expected confusion. Within a week, my head felt clear for the first time in months. I found documents hidden in a folder behind old tax files, my property transferred, my investments liquidated. 847 dollars had gone on paper, redirected into accounts I didn't recognize. Her handwriting filled the margins. My signature was there, forged carefully, lovingly even. I needed help, but not from my son. I called my nephew, the quiet one everyone underestimated. He worked in finance, had a calm voice, and a mind that never rushed. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. He just said, "Uncle, do exactly as I say. And trust me." For 3 months, I played the role they had written for me. I acted weaker. I signed harmless-looking papers they put in front of me, all while my nephew documented everything. He installed small cameras. He tracked the money trail. He arranged medical tests that proved I had been drugged with a sedative mixed into my coffee daily. Not enough to kill me, just enough to cloud me. Then we waited. The moment came when the last account was drained and the house was officially no longer mine. I was moved into a small back room, told it was safer. 2 days later, they left me alone and went out to celebrate. That night, my nephew walked in with a lawyer, a doctor, and 2 police officers. By morning, the house was full again, but not with laughter. My daughter-in-law screamed when the evidence was placed on the table. Bank records, video footage, medical reports. The forged documents collapsed under forensic review. My son fell apart first. He cried, said he didn't know how far she had gone. Maybe that was true, maybe not. It didn't matter. Every dollar was frozen, then returned. The house came back into my name. Charges were filed. She was arrested, still insisting she did it for the family. My son moved out, unable to face me. I didn't stop him. 3 months later, they came back, not confident, not demanding. They stood at my gate, thinner, quieter, pride stripped away. My daughter-in-law wouldn't meet my eyes. My son knelt. He begged, said they had nothing, said they were sorry, said they'd take care of me. This time, I looked at them for a long moment. Then I told them the truth. I don't want revenge, I said. I want peace. And peace doesn't live with people who poison your coffee and steal your life while smiling. I closed the gate gently. No shouting. No curse. Just finality. Now, my mornings are quiet. I make my own coffee. I drink it slowly, tasting every honest sip. My nephew visits on weekends. We sit in the garden, where the plant I once poisoned has grown back stronger than before. So have I. At 69, I was still strong enough to walk every morning, still sharp enough to balance my accounts, still proud of the life I had built brick by brick. But age has a way of making people speak over you instead of to you, and my daughter-in-law learned to use that. It started innocently, at least that's how it looked. Every morning she brought me coffee herself, insisting I rest while she took care of things. She would smile and say, "Abba G, you've worked your whole life. Let us help you now." I believed her because I wanted to. After my wife passed, the house felt hollow, and her attention filled that silence. Trust, I learned later, can be more dangerous than loneliness. The changes were slow enough to excuse. I forgot where I placed my glasses. I repeated stories. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. She was always nearby when it happened, gently laughing, reminding me of my age, telling my son, "It's normal, he's almost 70. Soon everyone treated me like glass, fragile, unreliable. When I protested, they exchanged looks. That hurt more than the confusion. Being doubted by strangers is painful, but being doubted by your own family cuts deeper. My body began to feel heavier, as if my limbs belonged to someone else. I slept longer but woke up exhausted. My mouth stayed dry, my thoughts blurred, and some days the world felt slightly tilted, like I was standing on a moving floor. I asked the doctor once if something was wrong. Before I could finish, my daughter-in-law answered for me, listing symptoms she had clearly rehearsed. Memory loss, she said, weakness, mood changes. The doctor nodded, scribbled notes, and told me gently that this was part of aging. I nodded too, even though something inside me whispered that this didn't feel natural. The worst part wasn't the fog, it was the shame. I began to doubt myself. When papers appeared with my signature, and I couldn't remember signing them, I assumed I had forgotten. When money moved from accounts I barely checked anymore, I blamed my carelessness. Every time I tried to assert control, she'd place a hand on my arm and say softly, "You already handled this, Abaji. Don't stress yourself." Her voice was calm, patient, convincing. It trained me to surrender. Meals tasted dull. My hands shook slightly when I held a cup. Still, every morning, the coffee was there, warm, familiar, comforting. Drinking it was routine, almost ritual. I didn't know that with every sip. Something was being taken from me: clarity, authority, dignity. The drug wasn't meant to knock me out. It was smarter than that. Just enough to make me unsure. Just enough to make others believe I was fading. Just enough to make me disappear while still breathing. What hurt most, looking back, was how invisible the cruelty was. There were no raised voices, no bruises, no obvious violence. Just smiles, concern, and a slow erasing of who I was. I wasn't locked in a room. I was slowly convinced I didn't need to leave it. That's how real betrayal works. It doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives with kindness, with coffee, with the lie that you are being cared for. By the time I realized I was losing myself, everyone else had already decided I was lost. And that, more than the drug in my cup, was the most dangerous poison of all. Once the fog settled over my mind, the real work began, not by me, but by the people who had decided I was no longer capable of protecting my own life. I didn't see it at first because nothing looked violent or rushed. There were no sudden demands, no arguments, no threats. Everything was wrapped in politeness and responsibility. My daughter-in-law started managing the mail, saying it tired me to read too much. She offered to organize my files because, in her words, important papers get confusing at this age. I agreed, relieved that someone seemed willing to shoulder the burden. I didn't realize I was handing her the keys to everything I owned. Documents began appearing on the dining table, neatly stacked, clipped together, marked with sticky notes where I was expected to sign. She'd place a pen in my hand and guide me gently, never rushing. "Just routine, Abaji," she'd say. "Bank updates, property safety, tax things." If I hesitated, she'd smile and remind me how stressed I'd been lately, how the doctor said I shouldn't strain myself. Sometimes my son stood nearby, silent, avoiding my eyes. That silence made me sign faster. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be the difficult old man everyone whispered about. What I didn't know was that while I signed harmless, looking forms, the real documents were being prepared elsewhere. Forged signatures, copied from years of records, traced and perfected until they matched mine better than I could write them myself. Power of attorney papers transferred control quietly. Property documents shifted ownership without a single argument. Investment accounts were liquidated, not in one dramatic move, but in careful pieces so no alarm would ring. Money doesn't vanish loudly when it's stolen by someone patient. The first time I noticed something truly wrong was when I tried to withdraw a modest amount of cash for a donation I had promised years earlier. The bank teller looked at her screen, then at me, then back again. She asked if my financial manager was with me. I laughed awkwardly and said there must be a mistake. When I returned home confused and embarrassed, my daughter-in-law was already waiting. She scolded the bank, not me. She said they were irresponsible for upsetting an elderly man. Then she suggested it might be safer if she handled all transactions from now on. I felt small, grateful even. That was the most painful part, how easily gratitude can be twisted into chains. Statements stopped coming to me. When I asked about investments, I was told they were safe and growing. When I asked for numbers, I was told numbers would only stress me. My son repeated her words like they were his own thoughts. Slowly, my life's work, decades of saving, planning, sacrificing, was reduced to a vague reassurance. I had built that wealth with blistered hands and sleepless nights, yet I was no longer allowed to see it. The truth was that $847,000 didn't disappear in a single moment. It was peeled away layer by layer, account by account, until nothing familiar remained. New accounts appeared under names I didn't recognize. Funds were moved, then moved again, scattered like dust. On paper, it all looked legal. My signature was everywhere, smiling back at me from the bottom of each page, mocking my confusion. Every forged line said the same thing: you agreed to this. What hurt more than the theft was the realization that they relied on my weakness to succeed. They didn't overpower me, they diminished me. They made my memory the weapon against me. They let the world believe I was slipping so no one would question why an old man was giving away everything he owned. It was a quiet crime, almost elegant in its cruelty. By the time I sensed the full shape of what had been done, I no longer knew which parts of my life were still mine. My name was on the walls, but the control was gone. My money was earned by me, but it no longer answered to me. I was still alive, still breathing, still sitting at my own table, yet on paper, I had already been erased. The moment that changed everything came quietly, without drama, without witnesses. I wasn't meant to hear it. I was supposed to be asleep, tucked away in the back room like an old file no one needed anymore. But sleep had been restless that night. My mind, foggy for weeks, felt strangely alert. I stepped into the hallway for water and heard my daughter-in-law's voice from the living room, low, sharp, stripped of the sweetness she used with me. She was on the phone, pacing, irritated. Just a little more time, she hissed. The accounts are almost clean. Once the last transfer clears, there's nothing he can do. He barely knows what day it is. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it felt loud enough to expose me. She laughed softly into the phone, not the polite laugh she showed family, but something cold. She mentioned documents, signatures, and how easy it was when everyone already thinks he's gone. In that moment, the fog inside me didn't disappear, but it cracked. For the first time, my confusion felt placed there, not natural. Someone had built it around me. I went back to my room without a sound. My hands were shaking, but my thoughts were clearer than they had been in months. The next morning, she brought the coffee as usual, setting it gently on the table, smiling, asking if I'd slept well. I nodded, lifted the cup, and instead of drinking, I carried it to the corner where my wife's old houseplant sat. I poured the coffee slowly into the soil and watched the dark liquid disappear into the earth. I told myself it meant nothing. Still, I didn't drink a single sip. By evening, I felt different. Not cured, not strong, but lighter. The heaviness in my head eased just enough to notice it had been there at all. The next morning, I did the same thing. Another cup, another plant. Within 2 days, the leaves began to curl inward, their green fading to yellow. By the 4th day, the plant was visibly dying. Plants don't lie. They don't imagine things. That was the moment certainty replaced suspicion. I stopped drinking the coffee entirely. Instead, I drank water when no one was watching. Tea I prepared myself. I kept my behavior unchanged, still forgetful, still slow, still obedient. That was important. The danger wasn't that they thought I was weak. The danger would be if they realized I wasn't anymore. So I acted confused when spoken to, asked the same questions twice, misplaced items on purpose. I let them believe their plan was working perfectly. Inside, something was waking up. Each day without the drug, my thoughts stitched themselves back together. Memories returned, not all at once, but enough to hurt. I remembered signing papers I hadn't read. I remembered the way my daughter-in-law watched my hand when I held a pen. I remembered my son's silence. With clarity came anger, but I buried it deep. Anger makes people careless. I needed patience. Late one night, when the house was quiet, I searched the study. I didn't rush. I moved slowly, the way they expected me to move. Behind old tax files and unused folders, I found it, a neat stack of documents bound together, hidden but not well enough. Property transfers, account closures, powers of attorney. My forged signature stared back at me again and again, steady and confident, written by someone who had practiced it. My name had never looked so certain while I had felt so lost. I sat there for a long time, holding those papers, feeling something heavier than betrayal settle in my chest. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about erasing me while I was still alive, turning my age into proof that I no longer deserved control over my own existence. That night, I made a decision. I would not confront them. I would not accuse. I would not react emotionally. I would survive long enough to take my life back properly. I became an actor in my own house. Every nod was calculated. Every confused smile was intentional. When they spoke about my health, I let them. When they discussed what's best for Abaji, I stayed silent. Silence, I learned, can be a weapon when used correctly. And, while they believed they were weeks away from finishing everything, I was already planning my return, quietly, carefully, and without mercy for the lies that had almost buried me. Reaching out to my nephew was the hardest step, not because I doubted him, but because saying the truth out loud made it real. Until then, everything had lived inside me: fear, suspicion, quiet certainty. Speaking it meant crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I waited for a morning when the house was empty, my daughter in-law out shopping, my son at work. I locked my door, sat on the edge of the bed, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. When he answered, cheerful and rushed, my voice almost failed me. I told him I needed help. Real help. I asked him to listen without interrupting. He did exactly that. I told him about the coffee, the fog, the documents, the missing money. I expected shock or anger. What I got was silence, long, focused silence, and then a calm response that steadied me more than sympathy ever could. "Uncle," he said, "you're not imagining this. And you're not alone. We'll do this properly." From that moment, nothing was left to chance. He told me not to confront anyone, not to change my behavior, not to tip them off in any way. He explained that truth without proof was useless, especially when age could be used against me. Evidence was everything. So we began collecting it, piece by piece, quietly. The first step was medical. He arranged for me to see a doctor outside our usual circle, someone who didn't know my family, someone neutral. I told my daughter-in-law it was for a routine checkup, let her speak for me as usual. But this time, when she left the room briefly, I told the doctor the truth. Blood tests were ordered, hair samples taken. The results came back clear and devastating: long-term exposure to a sedative, consistent with daily ingestion. The doctor wrote it plainly, professionally. No emotion, just facts. That report became the spine of everything that followed. Next came the money. My nephew followed the trail the way only someone trained to do so could. He accessed records, tracked transfers, mapped accounts that branched and disappeared. What looked like chaos to me formed patterns to him. He showed me charts where lines connected my accounts to hers, then to others, then back again. It wasn't impulsive theft, it was a plan, a slow drain designed to avoid suspicion. Each transaction small enough to escape notice, together totaling $847,000. Seeing it laid out that way made my chest ache. That was my life on a screen, reduced to arrows and numbers. Then came the cameras. Small ones. Invisible ones. My nephew installed them when no one was home, near the kitchen counter, the study shelves, the hallway where documents were often handled. I hated the idea at first. It felt like spying in my own home. But he reminded me gently that the house had stopped being mine the moment I was poisoned inside it. We weren't invading privacy. We were reclaiming truth. Weeks passed. I continued my performance. I drank water instead of coffee when no one watched. I pretended to forget names. I signed nothing without knowing exactly what it was. Meanwhile, the cameras recorded everything they needed to record. Her measuring something into my cup. Her removing files from drawers. Her guiding my hand toward blank signature lines while explaining nothing. My son's presence in the room, his silence, his choice to look away. Every few days, my nephew would visit casually, like a concerned relative. We'd sit and talk about old stories while his phone quietly backed up footage, audio, timestamps. He taught me how to remember details without writing them down. He told me to be patient. They think they're winning, he said once. That's when people make mistakes. And they did. As the money ran low and the plan neared completion, my daughter-in-law grew careless. She spoke more freely. She complained on the phone about delays. She joked about how easy it was when everyone already sees him as finished. The cameras captured it all. Every word became another nail. By the end of the third month, we had everything: medical proof, financial records, forged documents, video evidence, audio confessions. Not suspicion, not interpretation, proof. My nephew organized it meticulously, building a case so solid it didn't rely on my memory at all. Even if I said nothing, the truth would speak for me. The night he told me we were ready, I felt something unexpected: relief, not excitement, not revenge. Just the calm certainty that I had not been erased after all. That someone had believed me. That my life, my name, my work still mattered. For the first time in months, I slept deeply. Not because I was drugged, but because I was no longer powerless. The end didn't arrive with shouting or sudden justice. It came quietly, the same way everything else in this house had changed, calculated, controlled, and unavoidable. My nephew chose the timing carefully. He waited until the final transfer was made, until the last account my daughter-in-law had been chasing was emptied. "Let them think they've won," he said. "People reveal the most when they believe there's nothing left to lose." So I stayed silent, sat in my back room, and listened as they moved through the house with a lightness I hadn't heard in months. They were celebrating without music, without guests, just relief. 2 days later, the house filled again, but this time with unfamiliar footsteps. It was early morning. My daughter-in-law was in the kitchen, my son at the table scrolling through his phone. When the doorbell rang, she frowned, irritated, as if the world had chosen an inconvenient moment to exist. She opened the door expecting nothing, and found everything. My nephew stood there, calm and composed, flanked by a lawyer, a doctor I recognized from the independent clinic, and 2 police officers. For a second, no one spoke. Silence has weight when it's unexpected. I stepped forward slowly, not weak this time, not confused. Just old and very present. The lawyer began first, professional and precise. He explained the emergency injunction that had already been filed. Every account touched by forged authority was frozen. Every property transfer was under immediate review. The doctor followed, presenting medical reports that documented months of chemical sedation. The police didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. They already had warrants. My daughter-in-law laughed once, sharply. She said this was a misunderstanding. She said I was sick. She said I didn't know what I was saying. That was when my nephew placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, measured, impatient, cruel. Talking about drugging my coffee. Talking about documents. Talking about waiting until I was gone enough to finish everything. The sound of her own certainty stripped her of every lie at once. Her face drained of color. My son stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He kept saying my name over and over, like repetition might undo the moment. The money was traced in real time. Accounts flagged, transactions reversed, funds locked mid-transfer. Numbers that had vanished on paper began to return, one after another, like something breathing back into existence. The lawyer explained that because the documents were forged and obtained under medical manipulation, they were void. The house, the investments, the authority, all reverted back to me. When the officer asked my daughter-in-law to turn around, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked at my son instead, as if expecting him to save her. He couldn't. His silence, the same silence that had helped destroy me, now destroyed her. Handcuffs clicked softly, almost politely. Justice doesn't always need noise. After they took her away, the house felt larger than it ever had. My son sat down heavily, his face in his hands. He said he hadn't known how far she'd gone. He said he was afraid. He said he thought it was already too late. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him the truth. Fear explains silence, but it doesn't excuse it. He nodded, tears falling onto the table where I'd signed my life away. Within weeks, everything was restored. The money returned. The house re-registered. The documents corrected. Charges were filed. Fraud, elder abuse, poisoning. My daughter-in-law's name became something whispered instead of praised. Friends stopped calling. Family chose sides. I chose none. Months passed. One afternoon, the gate bell rang again. This time, I didn't need cameras or lawyers to know who it was. I saw them through the window, my son and his wife, thinner, quieter, stripped of the confidence that had once carried them through my home. They stood there like strangers asking for shelter. When I opened the gate, my son fell to his knees. He begged. He said they had nothing. No money, no home, no future. He said they would take care of me now, properly, if I just let them come back. I looked at them for a long time. I thought about the coffee, the fog, the papers, the months of erasure. Then I shook my head. You already took care of me, I said calmly. You took everything you could. I closed the gate gently, without anger, without triumph, just certainty. That evening I sat in the garden with my nephew. The plant that had once wilted from poisoned coffee was green again, leaves wide and strong. Recovery, I learned, doesn't rush. It grows quietly, honestly. And so did I. The months that followed were quieter than anything I had known before, and that quiet felt earned. After the gate closed and their footsteps faded, there was no rush of victory, no thrill of revenge. What I felt instead was space, space to breathe, to think, to exist without being watched or managed or measured for usefulness. For the first time in a long while, the house belonged to me again, not just on paper but in spirit. People expected anger from me. Some expected loneliness. A few even hinted that I might regret my decision, that blood should always come before pride. I listened politely and said nothing. They didn't understand that what I had chosen wasn't punishment. It was survival. Letting them back would have meant living every day with a shadow in my cup, a doubt in every smile. Peace, I learned, is fragile. Once broken that way, it doesn't grow back in the same soil. I returned to simple routines. I woke early. I swept the courtyard myself. I made my own coffee, slowly, carefully, watching the steam rise, breathing in its bitterness like proof of life. Each sip felt deliberate, earned. No fog followed. No heaviness settled behind my eyes. The clarity stayed steady and honest, reminding me that my mind had never betrayed me. It had been attacked. My nephew remained close, not out of fear, but out of care. On weekends, he'd come by with fruit or newspapers, and we'd sit together without talking much. He never treated me like someone fragile or rescued. He treated me like what I was, a man who had endured something and chosen himself at the end of it. That mattered more than sympathy. Sometimes, late in the evenings, memories surfaced uninvited. The sound of her voice pretending concern. My son's eyes sliding away when truth needed courage. Those moments still hurt, but they no longer controlled me. Pain, I realized, doesn't disappear when justice is done. It simply loses its power to command your future. Word spread slowly about what had happened. Some relatives apologized for doubting me. Others stayed silent, uncomfortable with how close evil had lived to their own lives. I didn't chase explanations. I didn't need public validation. The court documents spoke clearly enough. So did my steady hands and clear gaze. I spent more time in the garden, especially with the plant I had nearly killed months before. It had grown back stronger, its leaves broad and green, rooted firmly despite what had poisoned it. I found myself talking to it sometimes, not out of loneliness but recognition. Survival leaves marks, but it also leaves wisdom. What surprised me most was forgiveness, not the kind people expect, where you reopen doors and pretend wounds were lessons. My forgiveness was quieter and firmer. I forgave myself for trusting. I forgave my age for making me vulnerable. I even forgave my son in a distant, final way, not to welcome him back, but to release myself from carrying his failure. As for my daughter-in-law, I wished her nothing. Not harm, not mercy, just distance. Some people should remain chapters you don't reread. On my 70th birthday, there was no big celebration. Just a small cake, my nephew, and a candle that took 2 tries to light because of the breeze. When I finally blew it out, I didn't make a wish. I had already claimed what mattered. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's choosing to close a gate gently instead of slamming it. It's making your own coffee. It's trusting your instincts even when the world tells you you're fading. It's understanding that revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about refusing to be used ever again. I wasn't saved by anger. I wasn't restored by punishment. I was reclaimed by clarity, patience, and the courage to say no when no was the last thing anyone expected from me. And that, more than any money returned or document corrected, was the real ending of my story.